Ever noticed how a select few seem to grow calmer, stronger, and somehow more magnetic right when everyone else begins unraveling? In the middle of chaos, when most people scramble for reassurance and grasp at anything to feel secure, there are those rare individuals who move differently. While the crowd clings to reactions, explanations, and desperate affirmations, these people become quiet forces. They don't explain their choices, they don't justify their presence, and they never chase attention. Yet, without lifting a finger, everyone starts paying attention to them. Not out of obligation, but out of curiosity, maybe even reverence. This isn't sorcery. It's what happens when someone truly awakens. Not the kind you read about in cute quotes or spiritual blogs, but the kind that transforms you at the very core of your being. It's what occurs when you stop looking outward for permission to exist and begin anchoring deeply within your own truth. There's a massive misunderstanding about what it means to awaken. Many people assume it makes you softer, more agreeable, endlessly accommodating. They picture someone who gets walked over with a smile, who forgives endlessly, who sacrifices to the point of disappearance. But that's a misconception, one that reverses the actual effect of spiritual evolution. True awakening doesn't dissolve your power, it clarifies it. It doesn't make you pliable, it makes you immovable. The kind of awakening Carl Jung spent his life documenting doesn't turn you into a saintly pushover. It makes you something closer to indestructible. Not in body, but in essence. Not unreachable because you don't care, but untouchable because you no longer react to everything thrown at you. When the world turns frantic, you become a still point. When everyone else becomes desperate to be understood, you stop needing anyone's approval. You move differently, on purpose, not for applause. And there's a name for this level of development. Jung called it individuation. It's not just about understanding yourself. It's about stepping out of the control loop of other people's projections and emotions. You stop allowing their storms to pull you under. You stop being hijacked by every crisis that isn't yours. And in that you rise, not by force, but through quiet presence. Think about who truly influences others. Is it the one who constantly defends their ideas, argues their perspective, and tries to win people over? Or is it the one who speaks when necessary and remains unaffected when others disagree? True presence needs no proof. It radiates certainty without needing to be loud. And what about respect? Who commands it without demanding it? It's never the one begging for attention or approval. It's the one who exudes self-possession, who knows where they stand and doesn't require you to agree. These individuals carry an inner frequency that changes the room, not because they seek control, but because they've learned how to hold their energy intact. You might think being liked is power, but it's not. Power lives in sovereignty, and sovereignty, in its raw form, is the refusal to let anyone outside of you define your worth. It's the shift from needing to be accepted to choosing to be aligned. Most people will never reach this place, not because it's impossible, but because they're stuck in a pattern of giving themselves away, giving their energy to conversations that don't matter, giving their time to people who don't value it, giving their identity to roles that were never truly theirs. We've been trained, yes, trained to believe that to be spiritual means to be endlessly kind, to never say no, to endure mistreatment with grace. We call it forgiveness, understanding, patience. But often it's just fear dressed in holy robes. You've seen it. The co-worker who carries everyone else's workload because it's kind. The friend who never says no to toxic behavior in the name of compassion. The parent who lets their children disrespect them because boundaries would be too harsh. And they believe this is what makes them good. They've mistaken their inability to stand up for themselves as evidence of enlightenment. But in reality, they're not empowered. They're just exhausted. Jung saw right through this. He understood that real spiritual maturity doesn't look like endless softness. It looks like unshakable clarity. It's not about turning the other cheek every time. Sometimes it's about walking away with your dignity intact. Sometimes it's about saying no and not explaining why. Sometimes it's about choosing solitude over shallow approval. We are told that being spiritual means being light-filled. But Jung knew that wholeness includes both light and shadow. That a person becomes complete not by erasing their darkness, but by owning it. Your edge, your anger, your assertiveness. They're not flaws to be erased. They're powers to be integrated. Real awakening isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming whole. That includes embracing your contradictions, your wildness, your boundaries. Because power doesn't come from being universally liked. It comes from being entirely yourself. Now let's talk about fear, the kind that keeps people small, the fear of being alone, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being seen as too much. That fear fuels the performance. It fuels the endless overgiving, the appeasing, the saying yes when your soul is screaming no. And here's what no one wants to say out loud. Most people calling themselves spiritual are just terrified of being disliked. So they make niceness a religion. They trade truth for approval. They dress submission in love's clothing. But the truly awakened, the ones who've crossed into sovereignty, don't need to be liked. They don't shape-shift to keep peace. They're not addicted to being perceived as good. They don't need the room to validate them. And paradoxically, that's why the room starts paying attention. You don't influence by appeasing. You influence by embodying, by standing in your values without performing them, by letting your energy speak louder than your mouth ever could. Power doesn't chase. It doesn't plead. It doesn't shrink itself to be digestible. It simply is. And the more whole you become, the less interested you are in convincing anyone of anything. Look back at the truly transformational figures in history, the ones who altered the direction of entire civilizations without brute force. They didn't scream to be heard. They became so deeply anchored in their inner truth that the world had no choice but to recalibrate around them. Think of Marcus Aurelius, not feared for brutality, but revered for his calm wisdom, or Gandhi, who dismantled empires through unwavering presence, not aggression. They weren't spiritual in the sense of rainbows and mantras. They were spiritually sovereign, entirely rooted in themselves. That's what made them dangerous, not to people but to systems built on compliance. Jung spent decades dissecting the difference between those who evolved and those who remained stuck. And it had nothing to do with how often they meditated or how spiritual their vocabulary was. It came down to one thing: their relationship with personal authority. Those who refused to step into their power used spiritual ideas to justify their helplessness. They quoted teachers, but never became their own. They talked about love, but feared confrontation. They smiled through pain and called it growth. But the ones who truly evolved, they used their awakening as a foundation for leadership. Not leadership over others, but leadership over themselves. They didn't use spiritual teachings as excuses to remain small. They used them as blueprints to expand. Jung discovered that the moment you no longer need a specific outcome, you begin to influence the outcome. The one willing to walk away from the table controls the terms of the deal. The one who doesn't cling to approval gets it anyway. The one who doesn't fear loss becomes irresistible to gain. That's not coldness. That's detachment. That's the art of being present without being dependent. Step into any space and you can feel it. The difference between those performing competence and those radiating confidence. The true leaders are rarely the loudest. They don't command with volume. They lead with gravity. Their stillness draws others in. Their groundedness anchors the room. This isn't personality, this is inner structure. It's the product of someone who has faced their inner landscape, walked through their shadows, and come out the other side with nothing to hide. But here's where the confusion happens. Many people confuse passivity with spiritual progress. They believe saying nothing, reacting to nothing, tolerating everything is evolution. It's not. It's avoidance. And it creates people who appear calm on the surface, but inside are burning with resentment, sadness, and invisible fatigue. Real evolution requires facing what you'd rather run from. It's not about always being composed. It's about having access to your full range, knowing when to be gentle and when to be fierce, when to listen and when to leave, when to stand firm and when to surrender. And here's what makes someone magnetic. It's not perfection. It's integrity. Not just moral integrity, but energetic integrity, being aligned inside and out, saying what you mean, doing what you believe, not leaking energy into roles that no longer fit or performances that don't serve. People feel it. Whether they understand it or not, they respond to it. You stop needing to prove your worth. You stop needing to be needed. And in that release, you gain influence. Jung's most profound observation was this: the aspects of yourself you've suppressed, the anger, the desire, the hunger for control, the selfishness, don't vanish. They hide. They burrow into your unconscious, and from there, they run the show. They whisper into your decisions. They shape your reactions. They cause you to sabotage relationships, to explode over small things, to guilt-trip others, to give until you resent. You don't heal by pretending these pieces don't exist. You heal by welcoming them home, by acknowledging that you are capable of all of it and still worthy. Integration is not indulgence, it's maturity. And when you finally bring your denied qualities into the light, they stop controlling you. You gain choice. You gain discernment. You gain peace, because peace isn't passive. It's power that doesn't need to shout. Once you begin the process of integrating the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding, your buried frustration, your longing to be seen, your hunger for power, your urge to draw boundaries, you start experiencing something extraordinary, a sense of energetic cohesion, of being stitched back together from fragments you didn't even know had splintered off. And that internal wholeness creates a gravitational pull. People feel it, even if they can't articulate it. They sense that you're not a character trying to impress. You're a presence, fully embodied, fully unbothered. This is the distinction Jung dedicated his life to illuminating. That true transformation isn't about deleting your shadow, but mastering your relationship with it. You don't become a saint. You become something far more authentic, a complete human being, with full access to every emotional tool in the box. You no longer suppress your fire. You manage it. You no longer deny your ambition. You direct it. You stop pretending you're above confrontation and instead engage it wisely. It's easy to misunderstand this as license to be aggressive or manipulative, but what Jung taught was the exact opposite. He showed that integrated people don't act from impulse. They respond from awareness. They don't weaponize their darkness. They harness it with discernment. They become capable of great force, but choose when and how to use it, not for destruction, but for aligned creation. There's a fine line between reacting and responding, and most people live their lives on the wrong side of that line. Their anger controls them, their insecurity hijacks their behavior, their past dictates their present. But the integrated individual stands at the center of their internal world and watches the storms pass without being swept away. This isn't coldness, it's internal regulation. It's knowing when to step forward and when to step back, when to speak and when silence says more, when to fight and when to walk away, not from weakness but from discernment. But let's go deeper. Ask yourself, who do you resent the most? Who triggers you beyond reason? Who irritates you to the core without even trying? Jung would tell you those people are mirrors. They reflect something you've disowned in yourself. Their arrogance, maybe it echoes your suppressed pride, their selfishness. Perhaps it confronts your buried desire to put yourself first. Their manipulation, possibly a reminder of your own unused influence. That's the uncomfortable truth about shadow work. It forces you to look at not just what hurt you, but how you've become a reflection of that very pain. You said you hated how your father always needed control, but now you control your environment with silence. You hated how your mother made you feel guilty, but now you use guilt to get attention. You despised being judged, but now you're the one subtly measuring others' worth against invisible standards. And here's the twist. The longer you deny your own complexity, the more it runs the show from the background. You can pretend all day long that you're over it, that you're nothing like them, that you're healed. But if you haven't integrated those traits, you will continue to act them out in sneaky, indirect ways. You'll call it sarcasm, you'll call it setting boundaries. But deep down, it's just your shadow wearing a new outfit. That's why integration is essential. Because unacknowledged pain never disappears. It gets recycled. Through your relationships, through your choices, through your emotional patterns. Until one day, you catch yourself becoming the very person you promised you'd never be. But the moment you decide to own it, without shame, without excuses, that's when you take the reins. You stop reacting from your wounds and begin choosing from your wisdom. You stop playing roles and start embodying truth. Integration isn't glamorous. It's messy. It's sobbing at 3 a.m. when you realize you've betrayed yourself for decades. It's confronting the quiet ways you manipulate others to feel loved. It's seeing how your generosity sometimes hides a fear of being rejected. But it's also liberation. Because once you've faced it all, nothing can be used against you. No one can shame you with what you've already accepted. No one can guilt you with truths you've already embraced. You stop being blackmailed by your own past. Now let's talk about something most people avoid. Self-betrayal. Not the kind where you lie to someone else. The kind where you lie to yourself every day to keep the peace. The kind where you shrink your opinions, where you nod in agreement even though your gut is twisting, where you say yes just to avoid conflict. We all do it. We say, it's fine when it's absolutely not. We give our time, our energy, our love to people who treat us like an afterthought. We pretend we're unbothered. We smile to smooth over tension, and every time we do, a piece of us disconnects. And here's what happens next. We begin to resent, quietly, subtly, internally. We start building stories in our head about how no one ever checks in, how no one really listens, how we're always the one holding it together. But those stories were written by the version of us that never spoke up. We trained the world to ignore our needs, and then we resent the world for it. This is how people become bitter, not all at once, but in micro decisions, one unspoken truth at a time, one swallowed no after another. That's why individuation is so vital. It's not about becoming special, it's about becoming honest, about tearing off the masks and finally admitting what you actually feel, what you actually want, what you're no longer willing to tolerate. And guess what? That honesty will scare people, not because it's cruel, but because it breaks the pattern, because you're no longer playing the role they assigned you. And when you stop playing the part, their entire dynamic with you begins to collapse. Suddenly, you're not the easy one. You're not the agreeable one. You're not the one who just absorbs everyone else's chaos. You become unpredictable. And for people used to your compliance, that's terrifying. But that's not your problem. That's their invitation to rise. Let's move into something deeper now. Belonging. Most people stay in harmful environments not because they're blind, but because they're afraid of being exiled. They'd rather endure quiet suffering than face the unbearable silence of aloneness. You stayed in relationships where your voice didn't matter, because the alternative, being alone with your thoughts, was worse. You tolerated disrespect from family members, because calling it out might mean losing the illusion of connection. You kept showing up for friends who drained you because setting a boundary might have made you feel abandoned. But here's the truth. If your presence is only valued when you're small, it's not love. It's dependency. And when you finally choose self-respect over pseudo-connection, you're going to grieve not just the people you lose, but the version of you who tolerated so much. That version of you was just trying to stay safe. That version of you was trying to earn love the only way they knew how. Honor them, but don't bring them into your future. Because now you've seen the pattern. You've traced it back to its origin. The praise you got for being easy. The love that came only when you were useful. The silence that was rewarded more than honesty. And once you see it, you have a choice. You can keep performing for belonging, or you can reclaim your voice and find real connection, the kind that sees you, hears you, and holds you without shrinking you. And yes, this path will get lonely sometimes, but that loneliness will be honest, and that matters, because honest loneliness is cleaner than toxic attachment. Now, let's talk about emotional manipulation. Not the obvious kind, the subtle kind, the kind we all engage in when we're operating from our unhealed parts. We use silence to punish. We overfunction so we feel needed. We hold space for people we secretly resent. We give advice when we're actually trying to control outcomes. We call it love, but it's fear. It's control. It's attachment dressed as concern. You've done it. We all have. And once you get honest about it, you stop. You stop trying to manage people's growth. You stop inserting yourself into crises that aren't yours. You stop offering help when your own tank is empty. You begin respecting other people's paths, even when they're messy, even when they're self-destructive, even when they're slower than yours. Because true power doesn't need to interfere. True power holds space, offers presence, but doesn't try to orchestrate transformation. It trusts. Jung called this the compassionate observer, someone who sees clearly but doesn't try to dominate, someone who loves without fixing, someone who knows the difference between guidance and control. And that's where your true influence begins, not in your words, in your energy. People won't remember the advice you gave. They'll remember how they felt around you, whether they felt judged or accepted, whether they felt controlled or safe. And when you operate from integration, your energy feels like safety, even when you're setting boundaries, even when you say no, even when you walk away. Now let's go into the real paradox. Most people think awakening makes you kinder. And yes, your compassion deepens. But so does your capacity for rage. So does your intolerance for manipulation. So does your clarity about what you will and won't allow. The difference is you're no longer reactive. You're responsive. Your anger becomes purposeful. Your selfishness becomes strategic. Your power becomes clean. You're not ruled by your shadow. You're partnered with it. You know what you're capable of. You've faced the darkest corners of your psyche and made peace with what you found. You're no longer terrified of being bad. You're no longer obsessed with being good. You've chosen to be whole. And that wholeness is what makes you magnetic. People can feel when they're in the presence of someone who isn't hiding. They can sense when they're with someone who doesn't need their approval to feel valid. That energy is rare, and when it shows up, it changes rooms, it shifts dynamics, it wakes people up. So let's come full circle. The journey isn't about enlightenment, it's about embodiment. It's not about becoming transcendent. It's about becoming real, rooted, integrated. And as you walk this path, you'll shed layers. Not because you're becoming someone new, but because you're finally letting go of who you never were. And every time you choose to stand in your truth, every time you stop leaking energy into performance, every time you honor your inner authority, you reclaim a piece of your power. This isn't a spiritual fairy tale, this is a reclamation, and it starts with a single decision. To stop betraying yourself in the name of peace, to stop editing your truth in the name of acceptance, to stop settling for less than honest connection. Because your power isn't found in how well you fit in, it's revealed in how fully you show up. Now that the layers have been peeled back, now that the illusions have crumbled and the masks are off, what remains is the question that starts it all. Who are you without the roles? Who are you when you stop living through expectations? When you no longer need to be liked? When you aren't hustling to prove you're good enough? Jung called it individuation, but let's strip away the theory and call it what it really is. Coming home to yourself, not the version you've performed, not the identity you constructed to survive, but the raw, original signal that was always there before the noise, the part of you that never needed validation to exist, the part that doesn't shift with the room, the part that can sit in silence and still feel whole. But let's be clear, this kind of homecoming isn't warm and fuzzy. It's disorienting at first. Because for most of your life, you've been taught to abandon yourself in micro ways, to adjust your tone to keep the peace, to bite your tongue so others stay comfortable, to water down your truth so you don't come off too intense. And the moment you stop doing that, the entire ecosystem of your life starts to wobble, because it was built around your performance, around your compliance, around your tendency to overgive, to over-explain, to over-function. So when you begin speaking from your center instead of your conditioning, people won't know what to do with you. Some will get confused, some will get defensive, some will call you selfish. But listen closely. What they're actually saying is, I don't recognize this version of you, the one who refuses to disappear. That's not a problem, that's progress. See, the old version of you, the one who kept trying to be enough, was always negotiating your value in every room you entered. You were reading the energy before expressing your own. You were studying people's responses before speaking your mind. You were always adjusting, always managing, always shrinking just a little bit. But now you're beginning to understand that real power isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet self-possession. It's the way you walk into a room without needing to dominate it. It's the way you hold eye contact without aggression. It's the way you say no simply, cleanly, without guilt. And here's what happens when you do that. People start reacting to your energy instead of the other way around. You stop being the responder. You become the reference point. You stop orbiting around others, and instead, you become the center of your own gravity. That's not arrogance. That's alignment. But don't think for a second that this path makes life easier. In fact, the tests get harder. Because once you've touched this level of integration, the world will constantly try to pull you back into old patterns. Your past will come knocking. Your triggers will resurface. People will try every trick they used before. Guilt, charm, confusion, silence, all to get you back into the version of yourself they could manipulate. And this is where strategy becomes more powerful than emotion. Emotion will tell you to fight. Strategy will help you stay centered. Emotion will want to argue. Strategy will teach you when silence is stronger. Emotion will want to prove your point. Strategy reminds you, when you're whole, you don't need to explain. Jung observed this over and over, that the ones who maintained their sovereignty didn't just awaken once and stay there. They practiced. Daily, they checked in with themselves before entering environments that drained them. They noticed when their energy was being hijacked. They set limits not just with people, but with thoughts, with habits, with internal narratives that no longer served. Because individuation isn't a one-time event. It's not a spiritual graduation. It's a discipline. It's a lifestyle. And the people who stay the course, they become dangerous. Not in a violent way, in a revolutionary way, because you can't control someone who knows their worth. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't fear abandonment. You can't distract someone who's anchored within. They become immune to the drama, resistant to the bait, unmoved by praise or insult. They've stopped reacting to surface waves because they're rooted in the depths. Now let's address something that gets distorted in mainstream spiritual circles. The idea that power and service are opposites, that if you're truly awakened, you'll renounce ambition. That wanting influence means you're still stuck in ego. But Jung saw through that illusion too. He recognized that the highest form of power is contribution. Not contribution rooted in self-sacrifice, but contribution anchored in self-awareness. You don't give to be liked. You give because it's your nature. You lead not to be followed, but because your integrity creates pathways for others to rise. This is what separates the sovereign leader from the spiritual narcissist. The sovereign leader is empty of performance and full of presence. They don't need applause. They're not trying to save anyone. They simply embody a frequency so high, others naturally calibrate to it. And they don't chase that impact. They allow it. That's influence without attachment. So what does this actually look like in daily life? It looks like pausing before reacting, asking, is this mine to hold? Is this situation calling for my attention? Or is it just pulling at my unresolved wounds? It looks like removing yourself from conversations where your energy is being siphoned, not because you're angry, but because you're done overextending. It looks like showing up fully in your relationships, loving deeply, listening actively, but no longer confusing compassion with over-responsibility. It looks like letting people feel their own consequences instead of absorbing them on their behalf. And it also looks like redefining strength, because the world taught you strength meant stoicism, that crying made you weak, that asking for help made you needy, that rest was laziness. But the integrated self knows otherwise. It knows that vulnerability is a form of power, that admitting your needs is an act of courage, that setting boundaries isn't pushing people away, it's making space for authentic connection. Because here's the thing no one told you. You were never supposed to do this alone. You just learned that needing support was dangerous. So you became the supporter. You became the one who never asked, who always gave, who silently carried the weight of everyone else's chaos. And now, you're unlearning that. You're remembering that reciprocity is part of alignment, that being held doesn't make you weaker, it allows you to rise stronger. That intimacy without honesty isn't intimacy at all. That being seen, truly seen, requires showing up whole, not polished. So what happens next? You stop living through performance and start living through presence. You stop measuring your worth in productivity. You stop apologizing for your preferences. You stop pretending to be less so others feel more comfortable. And yes, you will lose some people, but you'll find the ones who meet you in your wholeness, not because you change to become more likable, but because you return to who you've always been beneath the noise. And that's the paradox of sovereignty. The more you become yourself, the more you align with the people, the opportunities, the experiences that are actually meant for you. It's not magic. It's math. Energetic math. When your frequency changes, your field changes, and the things that no longer resonate naturally fall away. Not because you're rejecting them, but because you're no longer available for anything that costs your truth. And here's what's wild. Once you hit this level, you don't have to announce it. You don't need to post about it or teach it. Your life becomes the proof. Your presence becomes the message. Your energy becomes the lesson. People will ask what changed, and you'll struggle to explain. Because the change wasn't external. It was an internal restructuring, a quiet decision to stop abandoning yourself. You stopped pouring into empty cups. You stopped arguing with projections. You stopped confusing peace with silence. You stopped mistaking love for tolerance. And you started listening, not to noise, but to the still voice within that always knew the way. This is the kind of awakening that doesn't end in a retreat or a journal entry. It ends in embodiment. In walking through the world so deeply anchored in your essence, nothing can sway you from it. You're no longer chasing healing, you're living healed. And here's the final truth, the one Jung saw that most people still miss. The work never ends, and it's not supposed to. But it gets lighter, it gets clearer, it gets cleaner. Because once you've built a life that reflects your integrated self, you no longer live in reaction, you live in rhythm. You move with alignment, you breathe with clarity, you create without fear. And every choice from that place becomes an act of power. Not power over others, but power with yourself. So now the only question left is this. Are you ready to stop performing and start embodying? Are you ready to stop leaking energy into approval and start owning your resonance? Are you ready to stop managing everyone else's comfort and start honoring your own center? Because that decision, that single, radical decision, to prioritize your alignment over your reputation, to trust your intuition over tradition, to reclaim every part of yourself without apology, that decision will change your life. Not someday, not when it's convenient. Now, because the moment you stop asking for permission, the moment you draw the line and say, "This is who I am, and this is how I move," you become unstoppable. Not because you're trying to win, but because you've already come home